You are listening to Mindshock True Crime. This is the Delphi Case Series, episode 57. Breaking new details, mind-shocking revelations. Now, I usually don't immediately do an episode as soon as information is released. However, here we have some of the most mind-shocking new information released thus far in the case. Through a court filing here, March 13th, 2024, which reveals some very, very curious information about possible multiple parties at what law enforcement is alleging to have been the crime scene at a particular time. And lo and behold, Richard Allen is not one of these individuals. This is very, very curious. So supposedly, law enforcement does have a crime scene, or what they believe to be the crime scene. Law enforcement does have a window of time that they believe the crime transpired. And they have three individuals, none of which are Richard Allen at the scene at the particular time. And we will be examining all of this and more in typical Mind Shock fashion, with logic and reason at the forefront, unlike any other podcast out there. If you want to help support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. If notifications aren't coming through, just like and comment on more videos. That's how the YouTube algorithm works. And share, of course, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topological analysis, co-podcast, or requests. You can also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier, and there are free tiers on Patreon, so at least become a free member on Patreon. A lot of updates there. And you could also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Help support the channel that way. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. Alright, so why are we here with this special episode and breaking report in the case? For anyone who has followed the case, the recently released motion here is probably the single most mind-shocking document in the history of the case so far. And we will be going over it point by point. So I hope everybody's sitting down for this, because there are quite a few shocks here. Quite a few new details never before released. And we will be going over it. So let's jump right in here. So this is document number, cause number 08C01-2210-MR-000001. State of Indiana, County of Carroll, State of Indiana plaintiff versus Richard Allen, the accused. Richard Allen's third Frank's notice and request for Frank's hearing based upon newly discovered evidence and request for findings of facts and conclusions of law upon any ruling on this request. Comes now the accused, Richard Allen, by and through counsel, and files his third Frank's notice and request for Frank's hearing based upon newly discovered evidence. In support of said motion, the accused states the following. 1. On September 18th, 2023, the defense filed its first Frank's notice, which consisted of a 136-page memorandum in support detailing 1. Certain evidence that Tony Liot failed to include in his search warrant applications. 2. Certain evidence that was detailed in his search warrant application that was false. And 3. Evidence that law enforcement had acted in an intentional manner on multiple instances, attempting to conceal evidence from the defense and failing to tell the truth under oath concerning certain evidence. Now, a lot of coincidence theorists and authority-worshipping cultists will say, whoa, what do you mean? Law enforcement can't ever act in an improper manner. They don't ever conceal evidence from the defense. They don't ever fail to tell the truth under oath. Coincidence theorists and authority-worshipping bootlickers might say, what are you talking about? That is clearly an impossibility. There can't be any law enforcement corruption, and certainly not in Carroll County, Indiana. I mean, these goofs are so clueless. With their Dunning-Kruger stylings, pretending corruption and fallibility just can't exist in this case. It's a weird thing. But let's carry on for all the logical individuals that are actually interested in the truth instead of soothing their dissonance. 2. The defense incorporates the contents of its first Frank's notice and memorandum into this document. 3. On October 3rd, 2023, the defense filed its second Frank's notice, dealing how prosecution and law enforcement had attempted to conceal the identity of a Purdue professor whose testimony contradicted that of law enforcement officers Tony Liot and Jerry Holman. This notice was provided as a supplement to the first Frank's notice in order to bolster the defense contention that the state of Indiana and law enforcement were acting intentionally and or with reckless disregard of the truth to further support the request for a Frank's hearing. Now, some believe that this Purdue professor, I mean, there's more than one professor who's actually been named in connection with the case. And some believe there's also a geocaching angle here and overlap. If you haven't checked out those previous episodes on Mindshock, check those out. 5. After Frank's 1 and Frank's 2 were filed just before the defense was kicked off the case in October 2023, and again, see the previous episode, episode 56, I go over all the shenanigans going on with the judges, the lawyers, the so-called justice system involving the courts. I mean, what a clown show this all has become. So, yeah, just before the defense was kicked off, October 2023, the defense received certain geofencing evidence that the defense, did not have an opportunity to fully examine, explore, or discuss with its experts. 6. Just after the defense was reinstated on the case, January 2024, it received certain discovery in the form of a September 22nd, 2023 report authored by Sergeant Jerry Holman, purportedly memorializing an interview Holman, had with a former Purdue professor named Jeffrey Turco. Now again, this is a public court document here now. Everything I am discussing, all these names are in public court documents. 7. Both the geofencing evidence and Holman's September 22nd, 2023 report provide new information that supports the defense request for a Frank's hearing. 8. Specifically, the defense received certain geofencing evidence that at least 3 persons were in or around the crime scene at a time while the murders were taking place, according to law enforcement timelines. And none of the owners of the phones have any connection to Richard Allen. Let me say that again for the coincidence theorists, the authority-worshipping cultists, and the corruption deniers. The defense received certain geofencing evidence that at least three persons were in or around the crime scene at a time while the murders were taking place, according to law enforcement timelines. Now, it doesn't specify here which law enforcement timelines, not the law enforcement timeline. It clearly has a plural on the timelines. So apparently there are a few different theorized timelines. Now, is one of them 2 a.m. when screams were heard? I mean, I don't know. But the point is, none of this includes Richard Allen. I mean, this is kind of a mind-shocking revelation for everyone who hallucinates and pretends it has to be Richard Allen, and he had to have acted alone because their feeble minds just can't grasp any other possibility. I mean, they're licking so much boot that their brain just can't function in comprehending the possibility that either Allen wasn't involved or Allen was involved, but he wasn't involved alone. I mean, their brain, the mental capacity is just not there. You can check, obviously all the comment section for these gifs humiliating themselves proving this. But I mean, this is probably the most mind-shocking revelations yet. So not only is it not pointing to Richard Allen, but they specifically have evidence that at minimum 3 individuals were in or around the crime scene. 3, not 1, not 2. 3, at least 3. So 3 or more. That's interesting. That's very, very interesting. So for those that don't know, a geofence is a virtual perimeter for a real-world geographic area. A geofence can be dynamically generated or match a predefined set of boundaries. The use of a geofence is called geofencing, and one example of use involves location-aware device of a location-based service user entering or exiting a geofence. So it really seems that they're using cell phone tracking or possibly other devices. Either way, they have some evidence putting a minimum of 3 individuals at what law enforcement believes to be the crime scene at the time law enforcement believes the crime is taking place, none of which are Richard Allen. Not any of the 3 or more are Richard Allen. So even if he's guilty, there's evidence here 3 or more individuals at the alleged crime scene at the alleged time, or at least what law enforcement believes it to be. I mean, if this isn't the biggest mind-shocking revelation yet, so it's not that they're totally clueless and they know nothing. They have evidence pointing to 3 or more individuals, none of which are Richard Allen. I mean, that's curious. I mean, call me crazy, but I find that kind of curious. I also find it kind of curious that timelines in plural is mentioned. So law enforcement can't agree on a timeline? So are all the early rumors true regarding the FBI having a completely different outlook on the case as local law enforcement? Now, is one of these individuals Ron Logan? It doesn't state here whether it is or isn't Ron Logan. But the FBI were surely interested in Ron Logan. I mean, that's curious. I mean, is there anybody out there who doesn't think this is curious? Yaya Kelly in the chat here says, because law enforcement knows that's not the crime scene. Well, what's interesting is that this court document isn't stating where the crime scene is. It simply says the crime scene. It doesn't say where the bodies were found. It doesn't say they believe the crime scene is where the bodies were found. Court documents are written very specifically. I mean, these are lawyers. They know all the legalese. It doesn't say that in this court document, it does not state that the crime scene is where the bodies were recovered. It does not even state a single timeline. It makes references to timelines plural. So the only thing we could truly glean from this document here, released March 13th, 2024, Carroll Circuit Court, is that law enforcement has definitive information on 3 or more individuals, none of which are Richard Allen. I mean, that's what we can glean here. It doesn't state what the crime scene is, doesn't state what timeline we're working with. It only makes reference to 3 or more individuals at wherever the crime scene is at whatever time the crime happened. None of which are Richard Allen. I mean, that's really the critical point here, is regardless of when and where, Richard Allen is not one of these individuals. Now, does Richard Allen know these individuals? This court document is saying that none of the owners of the phones have any connection to Richard Allen. So supposedly no. Now, that's also interesting phrasing. None of the owners of the phones. So, could someone connected to a Richard Allen have taken someone else's phone, and the owner of the phone has no connection to Richard Allen, but whoever had that phone could possibly have a connection to Richard Allen? Maybe. I mean, I'm just going through the language here in the court documentation. Make of it what you will. This is Mindshock. I do not claim anything is true or untrue beyond what can be empirically verified in documents. Anybody can look up this document. It says what it says. Does that mean it's the truth? No, of course not. I am not claiming it is or isn't. This is Mindshock, and the motto here, of course, is the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. Another motto I like to use, of course, is that the truth is not afraid of investigation. But a lot of coincidence theorists, they don't want certain avenues pursued. They're terrified of certain avenues being pursued. Whether it's in the direction of law enforcement, whether it's in the direction of family members, despite the statistics that, you know, when children are harmed, it's usually a family member or someone close to them. So, yeah, I mean, coincidence theorists love to ignore all logic and reason and statistics. Point 9 here. The geofencing evidence would provide evidence of any of the following scenarios. A, those persons walking with the phones are witnesses that would have observed the murders as they were taking place, and none of them have identified Richard Allen. Or B, those persons walking with the phones were witnesses who observed nothing, as the murders did not take place the afternoon of February 13th, 2023, but the victims were taken to the crime scene after the search was called off. Or C, those persons walking with the phones were participants in the murders. Okay, so this is very curious. So it seems to be alluding here in the document that the timeline, or at least one of the timelines, is the afternoon of February 13th. Now, this is curious because a lot of goofs, a lot of Richard Allen guilters who hallucinate he's guilty no matter what and he acted alone no matter what, evidence be damned. A lot of these goofs hallucinate that that because he placed himself in the area and nobody else did, that it has to be him. Hallucinating that it's definitely the crime scene, it definitely happened at that time. But even if we take their hallucinations for the sake of argument as being true, clearly there's 3 other individuals here in the area. So what does that mean? Now, I know a lot of these guilter goofs who hallucinate it's Richard Allen and it's Richard Allen alone no matter what because he happened to be arrested and they saw it on the idiot box. But it seems here that it doesn't add up. It simply doesn't add up. Because who are these other 3 individuals? It's so they know who they are, obviously. They have their information. They have all the information of the phones. So apparently that info was not released. So are they minors? Are the owners of the phone minors? In which case, obviously, they wouldn't release the names. But even if they're adults, they still wouldn't necessarily release the names if keeping the names confidential was critical to the investigation. But clearly, Richard Allen's own admission or not is quite worthless next to definitive evidence. I mean, we're talking about the words of a human versus the scientific evidence of the geofencing, which might be slightly offshore. But scientific evidence always has more worth than the words of a human. Humans can lie. I know this is a huge shocker to the coincidence theorist crowd. The coincidence theorist, A.K. Dunning-Kruger crowd. Humans are fallible. Humans can lie. Humans can be intimidated or threatened into saying things that aren't true in order to protect themselves or their loved ones. I mean, these are foreign concepts to coincidence theorist goofs, but this is quite obvious to anybody with a reasonably functioning brain. So was Richard Allen not even there and he just said he was because he was coerced into doing so? I don't know. I'm not claiming that's true. We're just going through the court document here. 10. Said geofencing evidence was so important to somebody involved in the investigation that they created a map and plotted the movements of these persons, including movements that show that at least one of these persons was within 60 to 100 yards of the crime scene at a time while the murders would have been committed according to law enforcement's timelines. The phones, once again, had no connection to Richard Allen. Okay, so what does this mean? Does this mean there's 3 or more guilty parties and 1 or 2 of them were lookouts? I mean, it's been long rumored since day one that there was more than one individual involved in this crime. Now, I don't know exactly which map and movement they're referring to, if this is part of some kind of undisclosed to the public discovery. I mean, obviously, you know, the defense has access to a lot of information that has not been publicly revealed, and obviously so does law enforcement. 11. Furthermore, the map shows that the 2 other phones and the persons carrying those phones were in and around the crime scene between 12:39:54 p.m. and 5:49 p.m. on February 13th, 2017. So they were hanging out. So would that mean that would mean that they were part of the search party or pretending to be part of the search party? I mean, this is the most mind-shocking information that has come out thus far in this case. I mean, I don't know why there isn't more hoopla over all this. I mean, there's all this stuff in the media, and every time there's a motion filed, which has almost no information, this one has some of the most revolutionary and mind-shocking revelations for the case. Because it's basically stating that there are 3 or more individuals, one of which is directly at the body recovery site, which they claim is the crime scene, if that's the claim. The other 2 phones also go to the crime scene between 12:39 and 5:49. So that's interesting. So if they weren't directly involved, they still went there after the time the alleged crime took place. What does that mean? So are they all directly involved, or was there nobody there? But even if there was nobody there, I mean, I guess, so they were there. So they were there all day and then assisted in the search. I guess that's possible. I mean, if they're, you know, it's an unseasonably warm day, supposedly. Again, I wasn't there. I don't know. But supposedly, a good day for a walk on the trails, and then they just hang around to search. But one of these 3 phones, so it doesn't state here how often they intersect. So did all three phones meet up in close proximity, then branch off? One of them goes to the alleged crime scene. Then, a certain time later, the other 2 meet up with the one that was at the crime scene? I mean, obviously, we don't have the map here, but if that's what happened, then it clearly means that these 3 individuals were in cahoots, so to speak. Carol says here, I think the deeds went down in the interurban tunnel system. Greeno captured the entrance under the bridge during one of the videos. Yeah, I did an entire episode on the underground tunnels, which nobody seems to want to talk about, but that would match up as well. So if these were the lookouts and there was possibly a 4th individual intentionally not carrying a cell phone to be able to not be tracked, did that other individual go into the tunnels? And maybe that was Richard Allen. I mean, who knows? Supposedly they're stating here that Allen has no connection to these particular individuals, but, I mean, obviously, how do we know whether that's true or not? How would we know? So, yeah, I mean, this is all very, very problematic. Robin states, perhaps readying the area for staging in daylight. Yeah, I mean, if they had the plan... See, if this was all a plan to get to frame Ron Logan, then they indeed could have been setting it up early to do that. Not DB Cooper says it's just the geofence. It's not saying they were involved in concert. It's just something that they need more info on. Not necessarily, because unless you've seen the map of the geofence, it's stating here that they had reason to believe that the three, if again we can't see the map, so we don't know. Now the geofencing could be accurate up to 3 feet depending on what tech they're using. If they're using some kind of NSA tech, I think they could do 1 foot. But the standard one's probably 3 to 5 feet, which is still, that's pretty darn accurate. So if they were all together, then they splintered and one. Why would anybody be walking on Ron Logan's land, though, unless it's Ron Logan? And then supposedly the other 2 also went to the crime scene. Does everybody just normally trample around on Logan's land? Is that what you're saying, not DB Cooper? Because that's not part of the trails. They're not talking about the geofence on the trail. They're talking about the alleged crime scene, which is Ron Logan's land. Why would people randomly cross the river and just go to the area where the bodies were found? So it's not just a geofence. I don't know if there's been a ruling, Pat, on whether or not cameras will be allowed in the courtroom. Donna says, what about MP saying her phone was pinging all over town on the 13th? Yes, but this is not her phone. We're talking about 3 individuals, but yes. Either her phone was taken or she was with her phone. And that's not the crime scene or the time. Oh, there has been a ruling, no cameras? They go back and forth on those sometimes, though. Especially if people become... So the current judge will not allow cameras. So we'll see if that, you know... I mean, there's so many issues with the judge. I don't know if it's even definitive that'll still be... So broadcast cameras will be allowed. Okay, that was October 17th. Huh, interesting. Okay, so so originally it was ruled that they would. Last week they're saying no. So yeah, they go back and forth all the time on that. So we'll see. We'll see what it ends up being. Be more, I went over it a little earlier. A geofence is simply a virtual representation of a real area. Like GPS tracking off a cell phone, just keep it simple. Yeah, Kelly says, Gull probably won't allow pen and paper. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to believe that there's no new judge yet, but we'll see whether there will or won't be. Yeah, it's quite problematic. I mean, this whole case is quite problematic. But let's continue going through this. But yeah, I'm just surprised there's not more hoopla around all of this new information. Not DB Cooper says she allowed them October 17th so she could have them when she was going to publicly shame the defense attorneys. I mean, there's so much funny business going on in this case. I mean, that's mind-shocking in and of itself. Like, just the amount of funny business going on behind the scenes. So let's get a little bit more specific. Said geofencing evidence. Okay, so they made a map. Movements show at least one of the person was within 60 to 100 yards of the crime scene at a time while which again, this is the winter time, no leaves on the trees. I mean, this is clear line of sight. Okay, and the persons carrying the other two. So all three parties were basically in and around the crime scene. Between 12:39:54 and 5:49 p.m. February 13th, 2017. So does that mean they were part of the search party? I mean, this is very critical information because is it coincidental that they were around the trails earlier in the day and they were also specifically in the area of the crime scene during the search? I don't hear anybody talking about that. I mean, that's damning information. So not only are the same three phones in and around the area during which the time of the crime allegedly is taking place, but they're also there during the search specifically. I mean, does anybody find that strange? Is it just me? I mean, does anybody else find this strange? I think it's kind of strange. Call me crazy. Call me crazy. I find it incredibly strange. Now, again, that doesn't mean these people are guilty, as it's clearly laid out here, if the crime wasn't occurring at that time. But I still find it strange, because why are they around Ron Logan's land? Unless one of these people is Ron Logan, and maybe one or two people friends with Ron Logan? Like, who would feel comfortable going on Ron Logan's land? So, depending on if it's Ron Logan and one or two of his buddies, then okay, that could make sense why he's on his own property all over the afternoon. That could make sense, yes. And I wonder if most of the FBI's decisions were made specifically because of this geofencing information, regardless of whether it was or wasn't Ron Logan. Because there seems to be a rift between FBI and local law enforcement. And, I mean, we can't ignore that. It seems like they were on completely different tracks for some reason. So, let's continue here. 12. That defense has sought out but has not been provided any documents or reports that contradict or refutes said geofencing evidence, but have not found such evidence, nor has the prosecutor provided any when defense requested reports on said geofencing. So it seems, I mean, this is kind of weird. It seems like they intentionally do not want anybody looking in the direction of these three phones, which brings me to my next question. Were those phones belonging to one or more law enforcement officers? Or, if we want to get really crazy, how many FBI agents were on the ground in Delphi before the murders investigating XYZ? Because nobody seems to want to talk about that. Nobody wants to talk about that at all. So who do these phones belong to? I mean, if they truly were FBI agents, perhaps they wouldn't have been able to get those records, right? I don't know. But if they were just local law enforcement, I mean, perhaps they could. Is it Toby Leesenby? Is one of the phones his? I've never actually been able to track down a legitimately corroborated alibi for Leesenby. Some people think he looks like Bridge Guy. I don't know. But if one of the phones is his, what does that mean for the case? Now, again, I'm not alleging Leesenby's responsible in any way. Some people just simply theorize that he is, and that's why the case is unsolved. Some people theorize Doug Carter is Bridge Guy or one of these individuals. Do any of these three phones belong to Leesenby or Doug Carter? Doug Carter, in his own words, said nobody's been cleared. Verbatim, he said nobody's been cleared. Does that apply to himself? Does that apply to himself? He said no one's been cleared. So none of the family members, none of the police officers, not himself. He said nobody's been cleared. After Allen's arrest, he said nobody's been cleared. Let me repeat that again for the coincidence theorists. After Allen's arrest, when he said, today is not that day, even though it was the day they arrested Allen. having this press conference in a church on Halloween. I mean, this is what went down. Some people find this strange. I mean, is it not strange? I find it kind of strange. Call me crazy. I find it just a wee bit strange. Who do these phones belong to? And why is there so much resistance in giving this information to the defense? Why do they not want the defense to know anything about the geofencing? It doesn't state that in the report here, but it seems like they buried it in tons of documents, hoping that it wouldn't be found, because obviously legally they have to disclose it. But if they bury it, I mean, that's a common tactic for lawyers. They send over so many countless boxes. That way they can say, oh, disclosure, yeah, we sent everything. We sent all the thousands and thousands of boxes. So they bury some of these, like, really incredibly important pieces of info, and they just hope it's overlooked by simply sending so many thousands or tens of thousands of documents that it's difficult to find it. But then, legally, they still disclosed it, even though it was buried among countless documents. Let's continue here. 13, when Tony Liot drafted his affidavit for search warrant of Richard Allen's home, Liot, concealed from Judge Diner the fact that at least 3 phones and the people using the phones were moving in and around the crime scene at times when the murders would have been taking place according to law enforcement timelines, and that Richard Allen was not in any way connected with those phones. So if this case is solved soon, and if it simply turns out that these 3 individuals were responsible, and everybody knew the whole time, and it was all based on this geofencing information, what does that mean? Also, does this open the door to them possibly planting something to be found at Richard Allen's in order to point away from the 3 owners of those phones, whether the owners of those phones are law enforcement or not? Would that explain the entire Richard Allen timeline? If Keegan Kline was providing whatever information or data on those phones to law enforcement individuals, would they want to cover all of that up? Does that explain Kline? And Kline might not even know that one of his so-called clients, or whoever he was selling accounts or info to, how would he know if it was law enforcement or not? If it was, because, Kline, we have the gas station, we have the FBI supposedly not being able to recover gas station info. So who's on the did the gas station have some video of one of the owners of the phones? Is that why they want to keep the gas station footage under wraps? Because it reveals the owner of one or more of those phones? Is it law enforcement? That's my question. I don't claim anything is true or untrue. I'm just asking questions. Isn't it awfully convenient that gas station footage disappears? We're not talking about the early 90s. We're not talking about the late 90s. We're not talking about the early 2000s. We are firmly in modern times. Just not that many years ago, they can't recover gas station footage. Does anybody find that weird? Quantico, the NSA, they just can't get the footage. They just can't do it. All the billions and trillions of dollars developing their tech, it's just not good enough. Is anybody buying this? Yeah, I don't know. Let's continue here again. 14. Tony Liot should have notified Judge Diner that certain people who are not named Richard Allen nor connected to Richard Allen were moving in and around the crime scene at the time when Liot claims the murders were being committed. 15. It is reasonable to conclude that if Tony Liot had notified Judge Diner that certain people not named Richard Allen nor connected to Richard Allen were moving in and around the crime scene when Judge Diner would not have signed the affidavit, especially based upon the paucity of evidence otherwise contained in the affidavit connecting Richard Allen to the murders. 16. Said geofencing info would have provided evidence to Judge Diner that negated Richard Allen's presence at the crime scene. Liot should have told Judge Diner that crucial, relevant, and exculpatory information which had been available since 2017, especially when Liot's affidavit was written October 2022, over 5 years later. So apparently, I mean, I don't know, I mean, this is just really, really weird. But apparently, according to the defense, the prosecution does not want to provide any information at all regarding to these 3 phones and the geofencing info. Now, why? Who do these phones belong to, and what did the individuals say, if they were even interviewed? Now, if they're law enforcement, I mean, and it's all a club situation on who's in the club, then they would obviously all know what's going on, and it's all a big cover-up. But if they're not in the club, and they're not law enforcement, presumably, wouldn't law enforcement want to know what those people saw? I mean, I would think. I mean, does anybody else think that that's kind of important information, or is that just me? I mean, I don't know. This is all very, very strange. "17. Additionally, Sergeant Jerry Holman's September 22nd, 2023 memorialization of his interview with Jeffrey Turco once again reveals that he, Holman, attempted to deceive the reader of said report by leaving out key info and words uttered from the mouth of Turco concerning the likelihood that the sticks left behind were in fact runes, making Odinism's involvement in the murders more likely and worth investigating. Holman also failed to recite the words of Turco concerning the possibility that those who left the runes behind were involved in some type of human sacrifice." There it is, ladies and gentlemen, the bane of coincidence theorists' existence. Evidence of human sacrifice. Again, for whatever reason, coincidence theorists, authority-worshipping cultists, these Dunning-Kruger goofs who hallucinate that evil humans simply wouldn't be involved in some kind of ritual sacrifice, satanic, Odinism-related, whatever, occult-related, for whatever reason. A lot of these just clueless goofs just can't grasp that there's evil criminals out there. Obviously, a certain percentage are involved in Satanism. A certain percentage of them are involved in satanic ritual, abuse, and sacrifice. If you haven't checked out the Mindshock podcast on that, I go over hours and hours. I think it's over 8 hours of documented cases, prosecuted cases. And yet, the coincidence theorists still stick their heads in the sand and pretend and hallucinate that it's not just an impossibility in this case, it's an impossibility in other cases. Now, this level of goofery, I mean, I can't grasp it, but this level of goofery is why so much more evil goes unchecked. Because, I mean, this is worse than not having an opinion at all, but flat out denying the victims of such crimes even exist. I mean, how despicable and disgusting is that? To deny victims' experiences and to advocate for the denial of their justice. I mean, coincidence theorists and authority-worshipping cultists are truly an evil bunch when it comes to the denial of satanic-related crimes. I mean, just truly, truly despicable and unconscionable behavior. Now, here we have a professor who's claiming that these runes, not only are there runes connected to Odinism, but that they're specific to human sacrifice. I mean, I don't know how many times I have to read that again for the coincidence theorists. This is all an official court documentation. This is all a matter of public record. This is what it says. Now, I'm not claiming that it's true, but that's what it says. People have reason to believe that. 18. On September 22nd, 2023, Holman wrote a report in which he, Holman, failed to mention the word rune or any derivation thereof when memorializing the words of Turco. Runes were a big part of Turco's interview, yet Holman chose to exclude the word rune or any derivation of that word from his report. Instead, the relevant part of Holman's report was the following. I asked him, Turco, to summarize his findings, and he said they were inconclusive. In his opinion, he thought the sticks were placed deliberately, but unsure what they meant. He said that he provided some educational guesses in his report. I asked him if the Odin religion practiced ritualistic human sacrifices. He said no. He stated that no evidence or research indicates that religion practicing human sacrifices. He told me that if someone Google searched it, they may see that the Vikings were accused of human sacrifices, but he said there is no proof of it. I asked him if he ever heard of ritualistic human sacrifices around here. He said no. He told me not even in Norway, where this type of religion is more prevalent, has he heard of any ritualistic human sacrifices. I guess they've never heard of Bohemian Grove. 19. What Holman failed to write in this report were Turco's words that more strongly detailed how Odinism was likely involved in the murders due to the likelihood that the sticks were formed into a runic script. Quotations here, it's a given. So that part's not theorizing. According to the professor, it's a given. I'll say that one more time for the coincidence theorists. It's a given. And how it was very plausible that human sacrifice could be a component to said murders. I mean, because what kind of professor would say, oh yeah, it was definitely human sacrifice? Because even if the runes said that, how would he know that that's what it was, and it wasn't just placed there to confuse the investigation, especially if he has a brain? So it's all very clear how there was intentional deception here. Yes, that's not omission, that's lying, because he clearly rephrased it. Correct, Yaya Kelly. That is clearly lying and deception. I mean, this is just absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible, the level of deception here. You know, in other cases where there's not this level of corruption and deception, I mean, they clearly write up what experts say, and then they just say, you know, it might be disregarded. They might not even believe it. But, you know, look at all these cases. I mean, there's quacks coming out of the woodwork saying aliens did this and that. That's all documented in the interviews. It's not omitted. Like, it's, you know, only where there's something to hide do people start playing games with expert testimony, right? Because otherwise, they just, like, look up other cases. I don't mean aliens in this case. I mean in other cases. They have so-called experts come in or interviewing whatever, witness statements. They don't delete parts and intentionally rephrase things and intentionally deceive unless they're specifically trying to cover something up or to make it look a certain way. Sleuthy Goosey, I have no idea how people are still denying some of this stuff. I mean, people deny, I mean, there's all sorts of weird conspiracy deniers out. I mean, there's people who are still denying Gulf of Tonkin. There's people denying MK Ultra. I mean, there's all sorts of coincidence theorists and authority-worshipping cultists out there completely denying, you know, demonstrably proven and admitted conspiracies. Rochelle says, they admit that Bridge Guy is not a real guy. It is a composite made from many different pictures. It wasn't Richard Allen, and it wasn't any one person. Richard Allen was not one of the three at the scene proven with the geofencing. I don't know if it was proven, because he could have still been there. It's just his phone wasn't at that time. Again, if the murder took place somewhere else at some other time, who knows who was where? Yeah, that's a good question, Rochelle. I don't know. What is Stephen Avery or Brendan Dassey doing in prison? I don't know. I have no idea. Sleuthy Goosey says, you gotta know specifically what applies and what direction not to go in order to twist words from others' testimony, not just omit it. Completely change it to something safe. That's an excellent point, Sleuthy Goosey. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Let's continue here. 20. Because Holman had sworn under oath in his August 10, 2023 deposition that sticks found on the crime scene did not represent Odinism or any type of cult worshipping or any type of group that would have conducted the crime. This was from the Holman Depot, page 63, lines 10 to 20. It was in Holman's interest to hide the actual words of Professor Turco concerning the likelihood that the sticks were formed as runes are significantly featured in Odinism. It's so obvious here that whether Odinism was involved or not, there was clearly a concerted effort to prevent anyone from thinking Odinism was involved. A deceptive, illegal, and unlawful, and completely unlawful attempt to prevent anybody from considering Odinism, whether it was or wasn't involved. That's illegal and unlawful in every state, at least in the U.S. This is just absolutely bonkers. This is such a weird case. Just the amount of corruption. And the corruption deniers still think everything's above board and Richard Allen is guilty and acted alone. It's real weird. And not only that, they spend their time being triggered in the comment sections on social media, pretending and hallucinating, and then getting upset when other people don't pretend and hallucinate along with them, that it must have been Allen and he must have acted alone. It's a weird thing. 21. Turco's words and info that Holman left out of his report include the following. A. After viewing the way the sticks at the crime scene were arranged, quote, it was a given that the pattern of sticks was someone's attempt to replicate a Germanic runic script. B. One of Turco's colleagues, a Harvard professor with even more expertise, agreed. So they can't even just write this off as Turco doesn't know what he's talking about. It's not just him, but another professor from Harvard agreed with Turco. Why is this all being covered up? It's a weird thing. C. Odinism is an extreme neo-pagan, neo-heathenism ideology that has right-wing racist connotations. Brad Holder and Patrick Westphal were known to be involved in extremist racist groups. And I wonder, who do these phones belong to? So again, because this is a public court document, we can now say Brad Holder and Patrick Westphal's names, now that this is all completely public. D. Although he could not necessarily interpret the intended meanings of these sticks formed into runes, the stick configurations were pretty clearly runic, and that he, quote, could certainly imagine that this was someone's idea, that when you do human sacrifice, you carve runes. There are some poetic sources that would sort of support the idea that someone might have come across that scenario. Seems entirely plausible to me, end quote. And this is from Turco's taped statement, 15 to 15 minutes and 50 seconds. E. Furthermore, Dr. Turco discussed how runes were thought to have, quote, magical significance and would be used in incantations and rituals, and that there is a sacrificial connection in mythical poetry, end quote. A sacrificial connection. This was from Turco's taped statement, 1440 to 15. According to police reports, Brad Holder told Amber Holder that he and Patrick Westphal had a falling out over something that happened in the woods near a river during a ritual. Okay, Let me repeat that again. This is getting really, really mind-shocking. I also can't believe how many names are named here in this public court document. I don't have any of these names been previously publicly released. I mean, I don't remember. They're usually abbreviated in online conversation. I've never seen them in official public documentation. Also, did the defense here release the three names? Are they saying that it's Brad Holder and Patrick Westfall? I mean, obviously they're not saying that, but they're adding their names here for some kind of context, as if to point that they could possibly have been the owners of the two phones. That's how I'm reading it. Again, it doesn't say that. I am not stating it says that. It does not say in the document that I'm reading, on the point that I'm reading, I'm numbering them all, it does not say that the phones belong to Brad Holder or Patrick Westfall. It is simply stating that police reports have this information about these individuals, as if theorizing possible members, as if is my own guess and interpretation. Yaya Kelly says in the first Frank's motion, so they mentioned all their names in the first motion? That's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, this is really weird. I mean, this is the most mind-shocking information on the case in a single place that I have seen thus far. I mean, it's very possible. I mean, this case has already been broken completely wide open, and they know everything. And for whatever reason, there's a cover-up here. I mean, you would kind of expect that in this, I mean, if the crime went down the way they alleged. If it didn't, I mean, even still, I mean, it's kind of, it obviously they have a ton of information here. I guess from this motion, it's like a coincidence stack, because Brad Holder and Patrick Westfall supposedly are involved with groups who may or may not be involved in Odinism. And there's at least one police report where Brad Holder told Amber Holder that he and Patrick Westfall had a falling out over something that happened in the woods near a river during a ritual. Now, that's also not exactly specific, especially if there's no date, but who knows. Okay, hold on one second. And all of this supposedly was also backed up by another professor from Harvard who backed up Turco's opinion. So this isn't just one random guy's opinion. Okay, 22. In other words, here's what Holman did not write in his report. Turco told me that it was a given that the arrangement of the sticks were part of a runic script. Investigators have learned that runes are a feature of those who practice Odinism, and those who practice Odinism are sometimes aligned with racist extremist groups. Brad Holder's son had some type of dating relationship with one of the victims, and Brad Holder was an Odinist fascinated with runes, which are found throughout his Facebook page. Brad Holder and Patrick Westfall were also affiliated with racist extremist groups. Also, Turco admitted that it was entirely plausible that somebody would read something on the internet indicating that Viking religions involved human sacrifice, and that same person could have an idea that when conducting a human sacrifice, runes should be carved, and that runes have a magical significance and would be used in rituals. Brad Holder told his ex-wife that Brad and Patrick Westfall had a falling out in the woods near a river in February 2017 due to something that happened in a ritual. That's a lot more specific, so there's no date, but February 2017 is certainly a lot more specific and certainly a lot more damning. So in this motion here, he wrote what Holman did not write. So if there was no conspiracy or cover-up, what I just read is what the report should have been that's what Holman's report should have looked like if he was being honest. I mean, this guy's a pretty good lawyer to phrase this all like this. That's interesting. Sleuthy Goosey says, the Facebook page where all the mentioned evidence was posted, he deleted it. So that was Brad Holder deleted all of that? Yeah, I mean, wow. I mean, all I can say is wow. 23. Instead of including Turco's words detailed in the previous paragraph, Holman wrote that Turco's findings were inconclusive and then failed to even mention the word rune at even a single solitary time. Here's the thing, though. What happens when they put Turco on the stand and he says all this? I mean, what happens then? When he points the finger at Holman and tells them that he entirely misrepresented his findings. And what happens when they put the Harvard professor that backed up Turco on the stand? How does Holman look like then? I mean, that's kind of weird. I mean, looks like that's quite a hole that Holman dug himself into. I mean, how's Holman going to get out of that hole? I mean, does anybody know? Does anybody know how he's going to get out of that hole? I don't know. I mean, I don't even know if Keegan Kline can save him. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if he could. What happens when they put the Kleinmeister on the stand? I don't know. Point 24. If you were trying to hide Turco's actual opinion about the linkage between the stick configuration and a runic script and the entirely plausible opinion that human sacrifice could be a component of the murders, then you would draft your report as Sergeant Holman did as quoted from his report in paragraph 18 above. 25. If you were trying to provide an accurate accounting of Turco's opinion, then you would write it as written in paragraph 22, which is what Holman did not write. 26. Due to Sergeant Holman's sworn testimony from his August 10th, 2023 deposition, Sergeant Holman had a lot at stake when he interviewed Turco. Ideally, in order for Holman's sworn August 10th, 2023 testimony to be true, Turco would have told Holman words to the effect of, quote, "That configuration is not runic, and therefore that arrangement does not represent Odinism or any type of cult worshipping or any type of group that would have conducted the crime," end quote. Unfortunately for Sergeant Holman, Turco did not state words to that effect. Quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. Wow. Wow. 27. This explains why Sergeant Holman initially attempted to hide the identity of the Purdue professor in the Franks 2 motion, then attempted to conceal Turco's actual words in Holman's September 22nd, 2023 report that it was a given, quote, "It was a given," that someone was trying to replicate a Germanic runic script, and that it was entirely plausible that a person believed that human sacrifices involved the use of runes. Point 28. In defense counsel's experience, some lawyers simply don't listen to a tape recording of an interview, but rather rely on the veracity of police reports that memorialize that interview. Now, here's another critical point there. Here's another critical point. Lawyers don't listen to tape recordings of interviews. They look at the reports. How easy is it for corrupt officers to simply make the reports say what they want them to say, even if there's an audio cassette proving the opposite? You know what's weird? In the Scott Peterson case, his first interview, supposedly they didn't have batteries to record that interview. I mean, that was kind of weird. I don't know. Probably all coincidental. Yaya Kelly says 43 Rain Man solved this years ago with Google Maps. What do you mean? Solved it how? Like he named all these people? Oh, you got to expand on that, Yaya Kelly. I mean, we're all waiting with bated breath here. How exactly did 43 Rain Man solve this? What did he say it was? And do you recall the exact year, or roughly how long after the crime? While we're waiting for Yaya Kelly here, I'll go to the next point. 29. In this very case, for example, Brad Holder's February 17th, 2017 videotaped statement was purportedly erased. Only a short report memorializing that taped interview exists. Therefore, the defense is being forced to rely entirely on the words and context the author of that interview chose to include in that report rather than the entirety of the actual words uttered by Holder. The way that Holman memorialized his interview with Turco, detailed above, should cause alarm about what law enforcement chose to include or not include in their reports. The tape recording is the best evidence. What Brad Holder shared with investigators in his February 17, 2017 interview, but the authors chose to leave out, even innocently not knowing what was important at the time, could be exculpatory in nature or lead to exculpatory evidence exonerating Richard Allen. However, at this time, we are expected to simply accept the words written by the authors of Holder's erased interview, provide the full gamut of info needed to protect Richard Allen's rights. Again, Holman's memorialization of Turco's words in this case should cause grave concern to this court as it relates to any erased videotaped interviews. Just when it couldn't get any worse, now we have erased video interviews? What is going on here? What? Oh, so Yaya Kelly said she was just joking. Okay, all right. Okay. So, does anybody believe this? So, they erased Brad Holder's first videotaped statement. Why would they do that? Does anybody have any guesses here? I mean, are we to believe this is all a Keystone Cop situation? Or is Brad Holder some kind of CI, or does he have some kind of connection to law enforcement if law enforcement are indeed part of this crime? If Tony Leesenby is one of these cell phone owners, what does that mean? Again, I'm not alleging he is or he isn't. I do not claim anything is true or untrue. I do not claim anyone is innocent or guilty in any way. But what does that all mean? And why are they erasing interviews, or are we just to believe that in just one of the most despicable crimes in history, they can't even be bothered to maintain video interviews? And if Brad Holder is one of the owners of these cell phones with the geofencing data, I mean, wouldn't that be one of the important video interviews to keep? I mean, do they really have dozens and dozens of video interviews that weren't lost from just random people, but they don't have the ones? They don't have the ones that were actually critical and possibly present at the alleged crime scene at the alleged time? What does everybody think of this? Is this just all coincidence to add to the coincidence stack, which already reaches into the stratosphere? Point 30. If no one listened to Turco's actual words spoken to Holman on that audio tape, then Holman's deceptive memorialized report would leave the reader with an entirely different perspective than what Turco's words actually revealed. 31. As it relates to Franks, the defense is required to show that law enforcement acted intentionally when including false info in the affidavit or when omitting important information from the affidavit. 32. It would be highly unlikely that Liot would admit, quote, I intentionally omitted important information from the affidavit, and I also intentionally included false info in the affidavit. Also, I wrote the affidavit with a reckless disregard for the truth, end quote. I mean, how often do corrupt officers admit that? 33. If the standard to get a Franks hearing is that law enforcement must admit that they acted intentionally or recklessly, then a Franks hearing is a legal fiction, as no law enforcement officer will make such admissions. 34. Therefore, the defense is left with providing info of times and occasions when law enforcement attempted to conceal evidence or falsify info in other contexts in the case. 35. Franks 1 and 2 provided multiple examples of law enforcement concealing or attempting to conceal evidence and or law enforcement not telling the truth under oath, all backed up with exhibits that support those contentions. 36. In Section 3 of the September 18, 2023 Franks memorandum, the defense provided irrefutable evidence that Liot provided false info in his affidavit concerning the words that Sarah Carbow spoke face-to-face with Tony Liot in 2017 when describing the man she saw on the road just before 4 p.m. Liot told Judge Diner that the man Carbow observed was the same man Betsy Blair observed on the Monon High Bridge approximately 2 hours earlier. The problem was that Carbow told Liot in 2017 concerning this man's description was not the same as Betsy Blair's description, i.e., Liot did not tell the truth. Is it Ligot or Ligot? If it's Ligot, he seems to lie a lot. Well, even if it's Ligot, Ligot still lies. But would Ligot lie more than Ligot? 37. Ligot or Ligot then misrepresented Carbow's words so that they were consistent with Blair's description, and then for good measure added that Carbow observed blood on the man walking on the road when that is not what she told Ligot to his face in 2017, i.e., Ligot did not tell the truth. So now we have this individual, Ligot, lying about what he was told. So he said there was blood when there was no blood. That's kind of weird. That's kind of weird. How much lying is going on here? Loveday Jones with an interesting question. Any chance the girls were driven to Lafayette by RL? Do you mean Ron Logan? Wow. Wow. That would indeed be mind-shocking if that's true. But I don't know. Again, I don't claim anything is true or untrue. I do find it interesting that the thermal imaging drone didn't find any bodies. I do find it interesting that there are screams heard at 2 a.m. at night from people inside their homes when supposedly no screams heard when people are out and about in the middle of the afternoon. I find that weird. Yeah, I don't know. This is definitely a very, very bizarre case. 38. The defense would ask the court to reread Section 3 in its entirety and also to review the attached exhibits to the September 18th, 2023 Frank's memo that provided the absolute proof that Ligot misrepresented Carbow's words. 39. The defense would ask the court to reread Section 3 in its entirety and also to review the attached exhibits that provide evidence that Ligot omitted crucial information concerning Betsy Blair's description of the man she observed from only 50 feet away on the High Bridge, as well as the description of a vehicle found at the CPS lot after she left the trail that does not match any of Richard Allen's vehicles. 40. The defense would ask the court to reread the rest of Franks 1 and 2 in order to gain perspective on the many instances of law enforcement not telling the truth or attempting to conceal information and the truth. 41. This third Frank's notice provides additional information of omitted info of which Judge Diner should have been advised concerning 3 phones shown to be moving in and around the crime scene at a time when law enforcement would state the murders were being committed. 42. This third Frank's notice provides additional evidence that Sergeant Holman's sworn deposition testimony was false concerning the findings of the Purdue professor, as Turco's own words confirm in a September 19, 2023 interview. 43. This third Frank's notice provides additional evidence of law enforcement's intentionality of concealing evidence, as Sergeant Holman's September 22, 2023 report attempted to conceal the actual words of Jeffrey Turco. Again, Sergeant Holman had sworn under oath that Turco did not find Odinism or cults as being involved in the murders, but Turco's own words show Holman's testimony to be false. It was in Holman's best interest, therefore, to omit or water down much of Turco's own words in his report, which is exactly what Holman did. 44. The defense is asking, based upon this third Frank's notice, as well as the other Frank's notices, to set this matter for a Frank's hearing to argue that all fruits of the search of Richard Allen's home be suppressed. And here's another point I brought up earlier. If the fix is in, could this have been planted? Could evidence have been planted at Richard Allen's? Because they suppressed all this other info intentionally. So would it be beyond? Would it be beyond these demonstrably deceptive officers to plant evidence? Rochelle says here, okay, Lambertco says, where did you find that the family refused DNA testing? I found the same thing and looking for backup verification. Also, Loveday Jones says, was Ron Logan actually seen in Lafayette? Anyone can get a receipt. Yeah, that's a good point. I think they said, did they have him on some kind of cameras? I think it was said they have him on cameras, I believe. I don't know if they actually do, though. Rochelle says, Slimy Nick is MM. What happens if another MM is implicated in court? He has sworn to secrecy. What do you mean by MM? Talking about Freemason? Master Mason? He is sworn to secrecy, and any MM that gives the signal for help from other members must be obeyed. The consequence is severe. Huh. That's interesting. $45. Additionally, the defense requests that on this serious matter raised in Franks 1, 2, and 3, as well as the exhibits that back up those matters, the court issues findings of facts and conclusions of law as to how and why the court ruled in whatever manner it rules on the defense request. Wherefore, defense counsel by counsel respectfully request that this court set a Franks hearing and also to issue findings of fact and conclusions of law as to the reasoning for its ruling. Okay, so that's the third Franks motion. So what does everybody think? I'm going to do a poll. I want to see what everybody thinks here. Would law enforcement, is it beyond law enforcement to plant evidence? Just from all of the deception here. What a document indeed. I mean, this is the most mind-shocking, revelatory document thus far in the entire case. And I usually don't just jump in with just breaking podcasts, but I had to do it because for anybody following the case, it just seems like they're, again, early rumors turning out to be true. Now, obviously, it'd be very, very dark if the snuff film rumors turned out to be true. But it seems like, I mean, there's a certain circle of individuals, Kurtz, Garth, some of them claim to have actually seen the video. Again, I'm not claiming that's true or untrue, but that would be an incredibly dark angle. And again, I mean, how are the Kleins involved? Were they involved? Were they kind of the middlemen for trying to procure this type of content? And are there police or FBI also involved, which is what is muddying all of these waters? Wow, 85% say that law enforcement would plant evidence. I'll give it another minute, and then we'll just wrap this up with final questions here. Oh, wow, it's up to 88%. Not looking good for law enforcement. I mean, before the Franks motions, I mean, perhaps more people would have voted no. I mean, this is probably the first episode where I seriously made that theory based on this latest motion. Because if they're willing to do all these other things, I mean, it's kind of crazy. Again, the Stephen Avery case, I mean, you know, a lot of goofs hallucinate that they're just basically almost zero officers willing to plant evidence, but clearly history has shown that that is not the case. It's not just a few bad apples. There seem to be quite a few. Not necessarily the majority, but there seems to be quite a few. More than almost zero. 86%. Anybody have any final points here? We're going to wrap this up. I just wanted to go over all the mind-shocking new info just to have it out there. So, final questions, final points. Obviously, there are many, many questions regarding to where is even the crime scene, who those 3 phones belong to. 89% believe law enforcement would plant evidence. I mean, that's bonkers. I mean, it seems like a lot of people have lost faith in law enforcement, or at least in the law enforcement of that area. I mean, the Flora fire is still unsolved. I mean, there's so many questions in that area. It's really, really bizarre. Rochelle says the unspent bullet looks planted at the crime scene. I mean, it's definitely weird if that even was the crime scene, right? Yaya Kelly says, I'm concerned for the defense and what could happen Monday. I mean, we'll see what happens, but it seems like just the amount of information that's already coming out publicly, it's going to be harder and harder to cover all this up as more information comes out. Kind of like before Making a Murderer came out, I mean, a lot of the obvious corruption was only known locally. Now the entire world can see Corruptawak for what it is and go back decades and decades and dozens of cases of obvious corruption. So here, I mean, now we're firmly more in the social media age. I mean, all of this is firmly public now. So, yeah. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. We had 89% believe that law enforcement would have planted evidence at Richard Allen's at this point. Clown Watch says, hope Allen is not offed before the trial. I mean, don't you think they got to him anyway? Like, he's saying he did it, supposedly, in this confession. So, if he was threatened or whatever, I mean, he'll say whatever they told him to say for his family or whatever. So, I mean, I'm not even sure. I mean, obviously, it's still a risk, but yeah, I don't know. Any final questions before we wrap this all up? Obviously, we'll be back again in the next episode. I also have more information on the alleged crime scene. We'll be going over reports from various news outlets. I'm actually surprised more people aren't going over them, but the Odinism angle is not going away. There seem to be no shortage of experts that are backing that up. So either it really was some kind of Odinist type ritual, or it was intentionally made to look like one to divert the investigation or possibly frame other Odinists. So, yeah. Hope everybody found another edition of Mindshock True Crime interesting and informative. If you want to help support the podcast, help logic and reason and awareness be maintained in true crime cases so justice will not be eluded and there can be true justice, not just in this case, but in other cases, cold cases, missing person cases, wrongful convictions, and more. You can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You can also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, like and share, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comments section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.